Hey there, guys. All right, today we are back with some more of the Great War. This time back for Christmas, The Illusion of a Short War, Great War Week 11. Not going to say anything before the beginning of the video. Let's just go ahead and dive right into it.
The war of rapid victories was over, and the continuous war in the filthy trenches had begun, ending the rush of optimism with which the warring nations had begun the war, and bringing in...
Yes, I think this is one of the things that I think is so hard, perhaps for the modern day to understand, is because obviously in the modern day, since World War II, war has not been greeted with optimism. It has pretty much universally always been like disliked. It's a sad event when war is spoken about. Back then, before World War One. Throughout the rest of history, pretty much before World War One, war was kind of seen as chivalric, as an honorable thing, as something that is a part of life, that is a good thing. And then obviously today, after World War One, it's no longer a fun time for anyone, except for those that profit immensely from war. Industrial complex. Anyways, back to
a heavy mood of disillusionment that would crush the spirits of the millions of men fighting and dying. I'm Indy Nidell. Welcome to the Great War. Last week we saw the Germans laying siege to Antwerp, the last bastion of Belgian resistance, while in the east, the Russians were laying siege to the Austrians at Przemysl, the Austrian army now behind Russian lines. Another Russian army was on an endless march through Poland, but at the Aisne, in France. Both sides were stuck in the mud, losing thousands of men every day as the endless battle continued. And in Africa, the Germans were tying down the South African troops, preventing them from joining the fight in Europe. On the Western Front, Kaiser Wilhelm himself had visited his German troops at Chamonix, telling them that they would indeed be home by Christmas. And in Paris, after the Battle of the Marne a few weeks ago, there had been matching hopes for a French victory. However, in the French army, Commander-in-Chief Joseph Joffre abandoned his hopes of outflanking the Germans and winning a spectacular victory. He saw that his best hope now was just holding the line, preventing the Germans from achieving their own encircling maneuvers. But the Germans, under Prince Ruprecht, were coming on strong this week. Now, Ruprecht was the Crown Prince of Bavaria, the last one actually, and though he got his appointment as commander of the German 6th Army because of his title, he proved to be one of the best commanders in the entire German army, remaining on the Western Front for the entire war and eventually reaching the rank of Field Marshal. He nearly managed to surround the French at Lille and Arras on October 4th. General Ferdinand Foch was in charge of dealing with this threat. Foch's main contribution turned out to be one of morale, his iron determination, and his absolute insistence that there be no retreat. Soldiers must hold or die, which they did, and a major German push on Arras was knocked back. By the evening of the 6th, the French line was stable. The Germans then turned their full attention to the siege of Antwerp, Belgium, where they had been shelling the surrounding forts since September 26th. Now, 8,000 British troops were sent to Antwerp on October 4th and 5th, which sounds great, but many of these troops were raw recruits and had never even held, let alone fired, a rifle.
Oh no.
These men were merely a stopgap measure though. For a further 22,000 British troops, a full professional division was now on its way. Once they got there, the Belgians, with 30,000 British troops to defend them, thought victory had suddenly arrived, and the Germans were slowly pushed back. This was only an illusion, though, for the French government suddenly decided not to send any French troops, as they had promised. And this lack of support caused the British to hold back. This was probably a good thing, as the British and Belgians had no realistic hope.
What, is that a dog? Are those dogs? What's wrong with it? Those dogs dead?
Of defeating the Germans at Antwerp without French help. On October 7th, the German army began pounding the city of Antwerp itself, not just the surrounding forts, with 17-inch howitzers. The defenders, quite literally, had no means of counterattack. Their guns just couldn't reach, and the British would not move forward without the missing French support. On October 8th, the British began to evacuate. And on October 10th, the tired and battered Belgians could take no more, and King Albert, who personally commanded the Belgian army, was forced to flee the city. The long siege of Antwerp had dashed British and Belgian hopes of breaking out and claiming victory. Disillusioned, they now only resolved to hold back the Germans long enough to move troops from their posts northeast of Paris to the Channel ports and prevent the Germans from reaching the sea, which they did. In the east, in Poland,
good job.
disillusionment was spreading as well on both sides, as the technically superior German forces faced the enormous mass of the Russian army, now on the move in a seemingly endless, spirit-crushing march to positions along the Vistula River. On this day, October 9, 1914, the German army captured the Russian order of battle from a Russian officer, and they realized they had 18 divisions against what was now 60 Russian divisions in 2 armies in Poland, and even superior arms were not going to give Germany a decisive victory. So the new German battle plan for the moment was just to follow up the Russian columns. Really, that was it. Nobody wants to attack somebody that's more than 3 times as strong as them. You really have to pick your battles. And picking his battles is just what German General von Hindenburg did, winning a series of carefully chosen small victories during these weeks, harassing the Russians throughout Poland, and very importantly, keeping the Russian army too busy to help out with what was going on further south in Galicia, where the Russians were still laying siege to the Austrian army at the fortress of Przemysl. When the siege had begun 2 weeks ago, the Russians had been unable to bring in their heavy artillery because of the mud surrounding the fortress. But they had made a full-scale assault anyway, hoping to win before the Austrians could bring in reinforcements. It was futile and merely resulted in 40,000 Russian casualties. Now, the lands that these armies, whether Austrian, German, or Russian, were now fighting in were mostly inhabited by minority peoples of the empires, who were often unsatisfied with their status within their country. What we see throughout the rest of the war is warring nations making promises and hints to disaffected or dependent peoples to try to win them over in order to gain an advantage. The Russian provinces of Poland, which had been annexed in the 1700s, were being overrun by the German army under Hindenburg and Ludendorff, and many Poles in that region were beginning to ask the question, would the Germans grant Poland autonomy? Polish soldiers were also fighting alongside the Austrians, hoping that an Austro-Hungarian victory would re-establish an independent Poland. The empire encouraged this belief, and the Polish Legion, which became an independent part of the Imperial Army, was formed by Joseph Pilsudski in late August. Pilsudski, later Marshal Pilsudski, would go on after the war to be the leader of an independent Poland in the 20s and 30s. Being a minority in 1914, much like today in many places, most often involved a history of being hated and violently repressed for who you were, being invaded repeatedly over the years, or being murdered for your beliefs, and at best, only having a token say in the control of your lives and lands. But with the Autumn War came a change, as the reality of a seemingly endless war sank in among the powers, a reality that led them to grasp for any advantage and to search for new allies in perhaps unlikely places. The promise of independence or even just citizenship in exchange for your allegiance is a powerful one, and one that is still relevant today. Many of the minority peoples asked to fight in 1914 had never before even had a glimmer of hope of independence, and so they fought, based on the promises.
Halt! Who goes there? If you are a friend, join the British ranks and help the brave lads at the front. Cheerio. Top of the morning to you. We're British on a Tuesday.
Of a brighter future for their people.
Sorry for all my British
Unfortunately,
people
most of those promises turned out to be empty, hollow words, and millions more men would die for lies. So the Russians now encouraged all those Poles in the Russian domains not crawling with Germans and Austrians to fight with the Russians, also supposedly to further their nationalistic ambitions. Poles were now fighting against Poles. Nearly 2 million Poles fought in the war on both sides, with some 450,000 of them dying, mostly fighting to gain their independence. Britain was even trying to enlist the Sheikh of Mecca with the promise of future Arab control of chunks of the Ottoman Empire, but you also see minorities encouraged in various other ways. Jews in Russia, for example, were now allowed to rise to the ranks of officers in the army to encourage them to join up and fight, although they still did not receive full citizenship, and let's face it, were often murdered by Russian townspeople who needed a scapegoat for Russian military failures. And there certainly had been their share of them, especially the colossal ones at Tannenberg and Masurian Lakes weeks ago. Actually, 4 of the 5 major warring nations had now seen their share of both victory and defeat, but the 5th The Empire of Austria-Hungary had seen nothing but military failures riddled with incompetence. And there the Austrians were, at the end of the week, still under siege in Przemysl, with the Russians pressing them. The northern Russian armies were still on their endless march to their positions along the Vistula in Poland. And as for the Germans, after clever maneuvering, at the end of the week, Hindenburg was only 19 kilometers from Krakow. In the west, the last major Belgian town had fallen, and the 80,000 men remaining in the Belgian field army had retreated. But the siege had given British and French troops time to move their positions, and the final possibility for the Germans to outflank them was disappearing. The war was going to be long and bloody, and all sides now knew it. There would be no encirclement in the west, no Russian colossus triumphant in the east, no glory for the empire in the southeast. There would only be continuous battles in the muddy trenches with thousands of new recruits dying each day, or endless, freezing marches with soldiers dying by the roadsides in the mud and snow. This was modern war. See you next week. If you're just joining us, here's a good episode.
And that was Back for Christmas, The Illusion of a Short War. Great War, Week 11. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.